My ex-girlfriend is there. I have to go pick her up.
Cliff, my husband, said this, staring at a woman as if mesmerized. I was shocked and speechless at his sudden outburst. This happened on our wedding day, while we were on our way to the ceremony in the car. Cliff abruptly hit the brakes and stopped, seemingly observing the situation for a while. The woman Cliff was looking at was carrying a heavy load of luggage. Then, suddenly panicking, Cliff said to me,
"You're in the way. Get out of the car, quickly."
My name is Helena. I'm a 29-year-old nurse. Cliff and I are the same age, and we met through a friend's introduction. I'm so busy with work, I hardly have time for dating, but I do want to marry if I meet the right person. I told my friend in a bit of a tough request. She said, I know the perfect person for you. I'll bring them over next time. And went out of her way to arrange a meeting for me. At that time, I was working hard as an active nurse. I wanted someone strong who could pull me along. Cliff was exactly the man of my dreams. He took pride in his work and had a good sense of confidence, approaching everything with seriousness. I hardly ever talked to men outside of work, so I was nervous, but
being a nurse must be very tough, especially now. I guess healthcare workers are having a hard time, both mentally and physically,
Cliff said. His consideration comforted me greatly. I responded, Yes, it's challenging, but look at you, Cliff. I feel I should strive to do better. Cliff blushed at that. I was drawn to Cliff, not just his serious side, but his ability to laugh too. We dated smoothly after that and decided to get married. I felt I could live and we'd support each other without changing my life with him. I loved my job, so I naturally continued working after marriage. But one day,
there's something I need to talk to you about.
Cliff came up to me with an angry look and said, reflecting on whether I had done something to upset Cliff, I remembered him suddenly asking,
Can you quit your job?
Surprised. Why? I love my current job. I don't want to quit. Did I do something to upset you? I tried to remain calm and replied. Then Cliff said,
A wife who works harder than her husband? What will people think of me? From now on, Helena, you will quit your job and focus all your energy on housework. And I'll support you, okay?
He spoke in a commanding tone. Honestly, it was the first time I had seen Cliff like this, and I found it quite strange. I told Cliff, if you wanted a housewife, you should have said that before we got married. Then we could have discussed it. Cliff replied,
I've never met someone so dedicated to their job and striving for perfection. I thought it would be great if you became a housewife after marriage and took care of the household chores perfectly, as I'm not good at them.
He said quietly. Angry, I said, Then why not hire a maid? Or did you just want someone who could do perfect housework without costing anything? To which Cliff said,
Don't be ridiculous. Of course not. If I didn't feel comfortable with someone, I wouldn't marry and live with them.
I was torn, but still in the early days of marriage, and with feelings for Cliff, I thought I should try harder. Hesitantly, I said, If that's the case, I'll try a bit harder with the housework, but I'm not quitting my job. And please don't talk about such things until you can cover the living expenses of 2 adults on your own income. And I continued working. Cliff, perhaps very upset, not only stopped doing housework, but also began to constantly monitor what I did. Naturally, my workload only increased. There were days when I skimped on housework because of work. Then Cliff would pounce on the opportunity to criticize, taking pride in pointing out what was wrong. Frustrated, I told Cliff, I get it, housework isn't your thing. It's okay if it's not perfect, but since we both work, it would be nice if you helped a bit. Cliff sighed in exasperation.
That's what I've been saying. I don't like doing housework because I'm not good at it. It's hard to balance work and housework, so you should just quit your job.
He just wouldn't listen. I couldn't take it anymore and said, When will you understand that our household can't function without both incomes? Without my salary, we'd barely manage to pay the rent and fixed expenses. But he didn't seem to care. Whenever the subject of his earnings came up, Cliff quickly changed the subject. Then,
Maggie was much more perfect at it. I'm surprised there's such a difference between 2 women. No matter how good you are at your job, failing at housework, a woman's job, is a failure as a woman. Be grateful I married you, even though you can't do it perfectly.
Cliff said. Maggie was the girl Cliff dated before me. I was angry to be compared to his ex-girlfriend, but I also understood what he meant. Even though I was quite trusted at work, as a woman, I lacked charm. not just because I was married, but I was aware of my lack of femininity. Knowing this, hearing it from Cliff only made me more determined. But the reality was that we couldn't live on Cliff's salary alone. So I continued working as before, but tried to be more efficient with housework. Cliff was always watching, trying to find chores I hadn't done, but since I did everything perfectly, he eventually had nothing to say. Finally, peace seemed to have returned to our home. One day, we were having a meal with both our parents. When my mother Brenda asked about the wedding, I excitedly shared my dream. I always wanted a wedding, so I saved up for it. I want a glamorous ceremony that everyone attending will enjoy. While Brenda and my mother-in-law, Anaya, clapped in agreement with my idea, Cliff said,
"Do we really need to go that far? Besides, the guests probably aren't even interested in our wedding. They might think it's a hassle to give a wedding gift, but if they don't come, they'll be seen as unsociable, right? I bet they only come because they feel they have to. No one really gets moved by someone else's happiness, right? Isn't that just something from a drama?"
He laughed, completely dismissing my opinion. I had never thought like Cliff at any weddings I attended, so I was infuriated. Why attend if you feel that way? Cliff went on.
"Actually, if you have that much savings, why not share some with me? I work hard all day, sweating it out. Oh, I want a motorcycle. Let's save on the wedding and honeymoon and buy me a bike instead."
And just like that, he started planning to spend as little as possible, all for his motorcycle. Looking at our parents, I saw their faces tense, holding back what they wanted to say. Feeling unsettled, my in-laws quickly spoke up. "Cliff, enough is enough. You're completely dismissing Helena's wishes and only thinking about yourself. How can you even think of using the money Helena saved for the wedding on a bike just for you?" Anaya scolded him. My father-in-law Jordan added,
"People have different views on weddings, so it's natural for you and Helena to disagree. But to outright reject and insult her, and then just try to take her money. Do you realize how despicable you look right now? If you keep this up, you might end up divorced before you even get married."
He scolded his son. I told Cliff, "I've always been moved and had fun at weddings. Seeing a bride happy always brings tears to my eyes. It's a moment when you can feel how much the groom values the bride, and I even thank them for having the ceremony. Some friends have come up with events to make sure their guests have a good time, and I truly enjoyed those. But I guess you think differently. That's fine. Why don't we save on the wedding and spend more on our honeymoon?" I was glad my in-laws scolded him. But no matter how much they tried to get through to Cliff, it wouldn't matter if he himself didn't want to change. I was about to compromise and agree to Cliff's idea of a wedding when he suddenly said,
"No, forget it. I'll grant all your wishes. Those weddings you've attended must have been really good, huh? Then let's make ours even better."
Cliff suddenly became serious. He's the kind of person who doesn't like being compared to others. Plus, the warning from his parents about a possible divorce seemed to have made him reflect. Our parents looked relieved. "It'll be busy, but make sure you discuss things together. It's not right to only push through one person's opinion, but not saying anything because they won't listen is also wrong. Always share your feelings with each other," my mother said. Seeing Cliff's change, Anaya almost triumphantly said, "Cliff, that's more like it. I knew you'd understand if you talked about it. Look, Helena, how about this cute dress? It would suit you perfectly." She began suggesting ideas while smiling and flipping through a magazine. "Helena, don't hold back. If you need more money, we can help cover the costs." She even offered. I felt bad and said we plan within our budget, but my in-laws seemed really excited about the wedding, which made me happy. They had treated me like their own daughter since we started dating. "If Cliff ever does anything terrible to you, tell us right away," they continued to assure me. From then on, we were able to proceed smoothly with the wedding preparations. Cliff said,
"We'll have a wedding like no one else has ever had."
He started researching enthusiastically in books and on the internet, bringing more ideas than even me. Seeing other weddings, he'd say,
"This looks nice,"
and smile naturally. Watching him, I felt reassured that the beauty of weddings was getting through to him. We both loved to delve deep into things once we decide to do them. In our discussions with the wedding planner, time would fly by, and the days, though busy, felt peaceful and enjoyable. Finally, the day of our wedding arrived. It was a hot summer day, but the weather was clear, so we were relieved we could have the ceremony without issues. Cliff was also enthusiastic, and we woke up early, fully prepared to leave. We were driving to the venue with Cliff at the wheel. If we continued driving normally, we'd easily make it to the ceremony on time. While looking forward to it, suddenly, Cliff hit the brakes. I panicked and asked, What? What happened? There was no immediate danger, and I couldn't understand why Cliff had stopped so suddenly. Then Cliff said,
Let me pull over for a moment.
He steered the car to the side of the road. Suddenly he exclaimed,
I knew it. There's Maggie.
And stared at a woman walking on the sidewalk for a while. Surprised and speechless at his sudden outburst, I noticed that Maggie seemed to be struggling with heavy luggage, occasionally stopping to rest. From Cliff's reaction, I wondered if he was considering helping her because she seemed to be having a hard time. Though I felt complicated emotions watching him stare, I was relieved when Cliff resumed driving. To be honest, I had been feeling that Cliff might still have feelings for his ex-girlfriend. He always compared what I did to her, complaining whenever he felt I didn't measure up. I had hoped he wouldn't do such a thing on our wedding day, and was relieved it seemed to be an overthought. However, after a few left turns and losing sight of his ex-girlfriend, Cliff pulled over again and looked at me with a smile.
You're in the way. Get out of the car,
he said abruptly. Shocked, I responded, What? Why? Are you going to talk to her? You know today is our wedding day, right? Cliff replied,
She was carrying so much stuff. It must have been hard. Just do what I say.
Then he forcefully pulled me out of the car by my arm.
Don't follow me. Don't you dare.
He said that and drove off alone. Afterward, I was too stunned to think and just stood there. I couldn't catch up to the car, and I didn't have my wallet or phone with me. Anger began to build at the thought that he didn't care about our wedding, but I walked to the venue alone, not wanting to cause trouble. I thought even if Cliff didn't show up, I could tell my in-laws that my belongings were still in the car, and they would help me retrieve them. Thinking about the future, I soon arrived at my destination. The walk wasn't too far, and I arrived on time, but it was exhausting under the hot sun without a parasol. Entering the building to take a break, I found Cliff looking visibly downcast. It made sense that he arrived before me since he was in a car, but why was he here if he had gone to see Maggie? As I wondered, Anaya rushed over upon noticing me. Elena, I'm so sorry for our foolish son. Are you okay? It's been hot, hasn't it? Here, drink this, she said, offering me water. After gratefully accepting it. So what happened with Maggie? I asked Cliff. Cliff responded.
She said she didn't need help and ran away. Some guy I didn't know took her away. I had no choice but to come here.
He spoke indifferently, as if his mind was elsewhere. While I looked at him suspiciously, my in-laws paraded Cliff.
We've already said this, but leaving your wife on your wedding day to talk to an ex-girlfriend is unbelievable. What were you thinking? We don't expect her to forgive you, but you owe her a heartfelt apology.
Cliff looked utterly dejected. Anaya added sadly, We actually arrived much earlier than you two because we were so excited. But then Cliff showed up alone, and we were like, Where's Elena? So we pressed him, and that's when we found out what happened. I then asked, After she rejected you, why didn't you come back for me? I asked Cliff.
Maggie was really angry, huh? She called you the worst, and I just lost all motivation. I figured you'd come to the venue anyway, so I thought I'd just wait here,
he said. Looking closer, I noticed Cliff's cheek was red and swollen, later learning that Jordan had hit him, unable to hold back his anger. Then, to our surprise, Maggie arrived, with an unfamiliar man by her side, introducing him politely as her husband Nelson. Nelson glared at Cliff.
You tried to force a reluctant woman into your car, then run away at the sight of her face? I heard from Maggie. You've been following her, even after breaking up. And today, on your own wedding day, abandoning your wife to approach an ex-girlfriend is beyond low.
He was visibly angry. Maggie glared at Cliff, then turned to me. We did date, that's true, but we broke up, and I have no interest in Cliff anymore. I had no idea he'd leave you on your wedding day to come talk to me. I'm so sorry. I hurriedly stopped her apology. No, don't apologize. It's Cliff's fault, not yours. Maggie sighed in relief at my words. Cliff, losing his target of anger, glared at me, tears spilling from his eyes.
If you had stopped me more, none of this would have happened. Don't you feel any pain seeing me blamed like this?
I was about to retort that it was his own fault, but Maggie and her husband started berating Cliff. Maggie said, Enough already. I kept quiet before because only I was troubled, but now you've bothered both your wife and my dear husband. I won't forgive this. Don't think you'll get away with it." She glared fiercely at Cliff. Nelson added,
"What's with that victim's face? You've hurt both your wife and someone else's. Don't play the martyr."
He looked at Cliff with utter disdain. I said to Maggie, "You and your husband did nothing wrong. On the contrary, we owe you an apology for the inconvenience caused by Cliff. From what he said, it seems he was indeed asking you to get back together." I asked her about that. Maggie sighed deeply and nodded. "Actually, our home is quite close to Cliff's parents. He's ambushed me several times, pretending it was coincidental, and demanded we get back together. I always tried not to provoke him, but made it clear I wasn't interested. He was quick to anger, and I feared he might turn violent, so I kept it from my husband. But now I think I should have told him sooner." She looked on the verge of tears. Nelson added,
"I understand why my wife couldn't talk about it before. Seeing how unreasonable this man is, who knows what he might do if confronted. I don't blame her,"
he said. They seemed like a caring couple, and though they were strangers to me, I was glad Maggie had found someone good. I said to Maggie, "It's okay. We're the ones who should apologize for the trouble. Even when you said he was busy with work, he was pestering you. I'm really sorry." I apologized frantically. Then, seeing Cliff still looking unconvinced, I yelled at him, "You need to apologize too. Your actions have caused trouble for so many people. What are you going to do about it?" But Cliff just frowned in response. It was Maggie's husband who lost patience with Cliff's demeanor.
"Apologies are fine, but looking at that face, I doubt any real remorse. Anyway, I want nothing to do with you. Promise never to interfere with another man's wife again,"
he shouted. Cliff, his face turning red, stepped towards Maggie's husband.
"Maggie and I dated before she met you, so I know her better than you do. I want to get back together. If you're lonely after divorce, we can swap wives. Let's do that. She works hard, so she has money,"
Cliff said, as if it was a brilliant idea. His nonsensical words left not just me, but also Maggie and her husband speechless. Watching him excitedly talk about the days he would divorce and he would marry Maggie, I made up my mind. Let's cancel the wedding. I told Cliff, then apologized to my in-laws. "I'm sorry. I know you were looking forward to today, but as you can see, I can't marry Cliff. I'm sorry it's come to this after all your kindness." The in-laws replied,
"Helena, you did nothing wrong, and we think your decision is correct. We're truly sorry for our son's foolishness and the trouble he's caused."
They apologized, tears in their eyes. Looking around calmly, I noticed many venue staff observing our situations. Relatives and friends were due to arrive soon. Feeling too guilty to cancel at this point, I talked with the staff to turn the event from a wedding into a dinner party, deciding not to accept any wedding gifts. The venue staff, seemingly accustomed to such situations, arranged everything efficiently despite their disapproving glances at Cliff. I was filled with gratitude. Cliff, unconcerned about the attendees, kept dreaming about his married life with Maggie, cheerfully planning this and that while I talked with the staff. Seeing Maggie and her husband glaring at him with such disgust, I was amazed at how he could talk like that. After wrapping up the explanation, I went back to Cliff and told him I agreed to a divorce. As expected, Cliff showed no sadness and accepted it with joy. Right then, guests began to arrive. My in-laws, parents, and I kept apologizing to the attendees, urging them to at least enjoy the dinner party. I had never intended to discuss such a foolish situation, but Cliff was gleefully telling everyone about the wedding cancellation and our divorce. Those who arrived on time were in an uproar over the sudden cancellation. Furthermore, Cliff, faced with questioning guests, coolly continued his delusional talk about finding his true love and marrying the person he truly loved. "Escape now with your husband, Maggie. He's beyond reasoning," I whispered to her, pulling her aside, and handing her over to a staff member. She and her husband quickly left through the back door. Cliff, realizing Maggie was gone, became furious. Seeing them walking away outside, he rushed out after them, yelling,
"Maggie, wait! Don't go with that guy! Come home with me!" "Just stop it, Cliff. Don't come near Maggie. Just disappear."
Cliff was easily stopped by Maggie's husband, and then restrained by my father and Jordan, who dragged him back into the venue. I followed, apologizing repeatedly to Maggie and her husband. The guests, having witnessed everything, were thoroughly disgusted and left with remarks like, "You're the worst," to Cliff. The event ended with few people remaining. I felt sorry, but with Cliff's rampage, there was little else I could do. In the end, only my friend's parents and in-laws stayed. They comforted me, and I began to regain some composure. After the cleanup, Cliff said, "Now that it's over, I'm going to Maggie's house," and tried to leave, but was forcefully put into a car by my tearful in-laws. A few days later, with my in-laws present, I got Cliff to sign the divorce papers, successfully finalizing our divorce. I had my in-laws help move Cliff's belongings out of the house or send them by mail. It was a hectic time, but it finally came to an end. One day, while refreshing myself in a suburban town, I ran into Maggie and her husband at a shopping mall. Worried about how they were, I asked about their well-being. They told me that Cliff, undeterred, had been watching the places where they met Maggie, and even followed her to her home and workplace. Cliff had said, "We're still in a relationship, right? You only acted reluctant because you were shy, weren't you?" Cliff apparently kept asking for a reconciliation, saying only what suited him. Maggie finally consulted the police and began legal proceedings against Cliff. Cliff, believing he had done nothing wrong, spouted his delusions in front of the police, leading to him being deemed a dangerous individual. Prompt legal action was taken, and a restraining order was issued against Cliff, preventing him from approaching Maggie. Surprisingly, the restraining order seemed to dampen Cliff's spirits. Facing legal action, he finally realized Maggie truly despised him. Since then, he has apparently stayed away from her. While it no longer matters to me, I'm relieved that Cliff won't trouble Maggie and her husband any further. Maggie continued, "Actually, we're moving soon to a place near my husband's family. We came here today to buy cleaning supplies for the move. Helena, I hope you stay well," she said. I bid them farewell with repeated goodbyes, and they left with smiles. Watching their retreating figures, I silently wished them happiness. This seemed to be the end of the matter. Just as I thought to delete Cliff's contact, surprisingly, he called me. I had kept his number for property division matters, but didn't expect a call. Reluctantly answering the phone, after just meeting with Maggie and her husband, I was worried. "Can we cancel the divorce? Living alone made me realize how important you are, Helena. Let's live together again, cooperatively," I heard Cliff say. After pondering his words for a good 10 seconds, I calmly replied, "That's ridiculous. We're strangers now. No matter what you say, I have no intention of remarrying you. Please don't contact me again." I hung up, setting his number to reject future calls. Cliff kept making noise on the other end, but now I was completely free of him. He tried calling from different numbers for a while, but I ignored them and eventually changed my phone and number, finally finding peace. I've moved out of the house, so there's no worry if he shows up, and there's no way for him to contact me. Maggie and her husband have moved away, and if Cliff showed up at my parents' house, they would angrily turn him away. My in-laws, disillusioned with Cliff after this incident, sold their house. "This house is too close to Maggie's family. We've decided to sell it," Anaya and Jordan said tearfully. It pained me, but I hoped they would find happiness away from Cliff. Now homeless, Cliff was likely wandering alone, his whereabouts unknown. After causing a scene at the wedding, he's rumored and isolated among friends and at work. According to friends working at the same company as Cliff, he has become quite isolated there. It's a clear case of self-inflicted consequences. I sincerely hope he reflects deeply on his actions. As for me, I've started a new life from scratch, in a new place. I was invited to join, so I transferred to a new hospital. At my current job, I can balance work and life well, managing both household chores and work responsibilities. Starting afresh in a new environment, learning every day, and having a fulfilling job again is what makes me happiest. I've also built a good relationship at work, and I'm enjoying my days. Although I'm divorced, I am much happier than when I was living with Cliff. This experience has reaffirmed my love for my work. I hope for continued peace and happiness in the days ahead.